So, it is currently the next morning after the debate that you're about to watch, and I am really freaking tired. Oh my gosh. It was a long night because I ended up debating late at night since it was kind of late my time. It stretched into like 11 p.m. territory, and then I got to talk to Jeff for a couple hours after that. We had a really good discussion and everything. I didn't capture any footage of it, but it was really fun to have that kind of discussion. And overall, this was a very civil debate. I really couldn't have asked for a better very first debate panel for not only being able to get my views pushed, but also to be able to kind of represent the kind of image that I want to build on this channel, because I really do want to have more discussions like these. I'm not necessarily a big fan of blood sports debates, even though I can definitely handle my own in that kind of situation. I genuinely do like what you're about to see with these kinds of civil debates. They pushed me a little bit. I got to push them a little bit. The only regret I do have is that I wish I got to talk a little bit more. The main reason I didn't interrupt that much or try to interject that much is because my debate partner, Bones, was able to carry the philosophical weight with certain terms that I didn't have, which is why I did clarify a couple times that they may need to speak more in layman's terms in order to be able to not only help me out to be able to push back against their ideas, but also the audience to be able to help all of us be able to understand what they were saying. But outside of that little criticism of myself not being able to talk very much, I really enjoyed being able to have my views probed and being able to probe their views a little bit. And I really hope that you enjoy it too. I don't want this intro to go on for too long, so yeah, enjoy the debate. Oh yeah, also I'm going to be cutting out the open panel at the end, the second half of this debate, just because I want this debate to be more focused on like what I did and everything like that. And I wasn't really too talkative during the open panel just because I didn't really have much else to say and I was super mentally drained by that point. So if you do want to see that, definitely go check out Sarah's channel. I'll have her version of the live stream uploaded down below. That's also where you'll be able to find Jeff and Wi-Fi Gospels and Bones's social medias if you like what they have to say or you want to see more of what they have to say. And I do recommend it because they were genuinely chill with us. But other than that, yeah, enjoy the debate.
And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. I am Sarah the Raging Tomato, bringing to you a Moderator Monday on a Sunday evening. Just a little schedule accommodation, but also it kind of works out for me. And I am officially taking tomorrow night off. I don't get Monday nights off very often, but I'm going to take one. And I'm just going to take a brief moment to send a big shout out. I will say, Saturday morning, I woke up thinking, man, like, what if my show fails? What if I don't do this? What if it doesn't work out? And then later that day, we officially hit the 10K subscriber number. And I kind of, all of my doubts in myself, all of my thought to be failures that have not happened, went to the side and I said, wow, here we are. We did this. I can't believe we're here. So, big shout out to all of you who subscribe, who watch. The Mater Nation is in the house, rocking, kicking, and I'm super excited we could have a show this evening to celebrate. Outside of
Is
that,
it from snow?
cheers to that. I'll
Yay!
cheers my giant cup of coffee to all of you fine maters. I love you
There you go.
all. And thank you for being here with us to celebrate. This evening, I have Paul Laddix, I have Boons of Doom, I have Alex from Wi Fi Gospel, and of course, I have Jeff Klein here to ask the question: is God's existence knowable? We will switch the opening statements around a little bit this evening. So I will clarify Alex and Jeff are on the yes, so the more affirmative side of things, and Paul and Boons are on the no. But they're going to go ahead and kick off with their opening statements. Paul, to you.
Sounds good. Let me just get my teleprompter rolling because I have my opening statement on my teleprompter thing. So, first of all, I really want to thank everybody for coming here, and I look forward to having a totally civil discussion about this topic. My very first debate panel, so I'm a little bit nervous. I want to open this debate with me and my partner's stance and what we're looking to get from our opponents. We're both arguing about God's existence from a strictly agnostic perspective. Neither of us are atheists. I've been actually getting attacked by a bunch of atheists for the past few days on my YouTube channel because I actually proposed the same arguments I'm going to be proposing to my opponents here. So go check that out after this. So I'm going to be going over three main points I believe my opponents are going to bring up and why I see them as fundamentally flawed. the transcendental argument for God and whether it has any kind of basis, the fundamentals of epistemology, and the problem with God and divine knowledge. First, I'll cover the TAG, short for transcendental argument for God, or I'll just call it TAG for the sake of simplicity. There are a few variations of this argument, but the general structure goes something like this. 1. Knowledge, logic, and reason exist. 2. These things could not exist without God. 3. Therefore, the existence of God, logic, and reason proves that God exists. The core of the argument is that God isn't just one possible explanation, he is the necessary precondition. If God didn't exist, then according to this argument, nothing would be known, no reasoning would be valid, and the logic itself would collapse. There are a lot of problems with tag, but let's start with the biggest one. Says who? Who says knowledge, logic, and reason can't exist without God? That's not an argument, it's just an assumption. This is a textbook case of the gods of the gas fallacy. When someone doesn't have a clear answer to a deep question, like where knowledge or logic originates, they just insert God because they think there's no other option. But that's not reasoning. That's just plugging a gap in a belief. 1 second. My thing's scrolling a little bit too fast. Um, so here's our challenge to our opponents. Why do we need an answer to this question at all? And if we did, why should God be the answer? Isn't it just as reasonable, if not more so, to say that the knowledge developed through centuries of trial and error, through observation, philosophy, and science? Why assume a transcendental supernatural being is behind it when human history shows a clear progression of discovery? The second argument I propose against the TAG is that this argument could be applicable to any religion which asserts itself as the foundation of knowledge. My opponents will inevitably say something along the lines of Christianity is the only religion which asserts itself as the foundation of knowledge, therefore it's true. But let me propose a counter argument to that. What if I took everything the Bible says, replaced it with the lore of the flying spaghetti monster, aka Pastafarianism, and asserted that as being the basis of all knowledge? It looks just as valid as their claim, no matter how you look at it. And my opponents will say that the Christian faith is divinely inspired. Well, so is the worshiping a pasta monster. It's just as divinely inspired as yours. And if we are to be as stubborn as my opponents, nothing they can say can refute the flying spaghetti monster. If, unfa- if unfalsifiable divine revelation is enough to justify truth, then congratulations. The flying spaghetti monster is just as real as the Christian God. Is that absurd? Well, that's the point. The third and final argument against tag is about what we even mean by knowledge. There's multiple kinds of knowledge, and I'm wanting to clarify which ones I'm referring to, and ask my opponents to do the same when they talk about God's existence being knowable. For instance, there's absolute knowledge, perfect, undeniable truth that can't be proven wrong, and supposedly withstands the test of times until the universe collapses. That kind of sounds like the kind of knowledge my opponents will appeal to, unless they correct me. I, however, don't believe this level of certainty is attainable, especially considering our senses can deceive us. Just think about hallucinations, for example. Then there's empirical knowledge, the kind that's based off of measurable, observable reality, and it's the kind that I rely on when I say God's existence is unknowable. And after all, by their own admission, God exists on a wholly different plane from us, which means we can't measure, verify, or observe him in any meaningful way. There are other forms of knowledge too, but these are the two most commonly used in everyday conversation, so I hope these are the ones that we can stick to for the sake of clarity in this debate. My second argument against my opponents is that they, like most theists and even many atheists, fundamentally misunderstand epistemology. There are three branches of epistemology relevant to this discussion: empiricism, rationalism, and foundationalism. Empiricism concerns data, measurements, and verification in material reality. Rationalism concerns logic, the interpretation and structuring of facts and theories, and it's the branch my opponents believe they're going to be using my opponents believe they're going to be using for God, but in truth, they rely almost entirely on foundationalism, which holds that certain beliefs are self-evident and needs no justification. That is the core of their argument that God's existence is self-evident. We see this clearly in Tag when they jump from knowledge exists to God is the only explanation, a massive leap with no causal justification. Even if you argue this holds up by abstract philosophical standards, the argument crumbles under the second it's subjected to scrutiny. All I have to do is keep asking, says who, and their framework begins to collapse. Instead of giving direct answers, they deflect into verbose detours about the laws of logic, which I'll remind you were developed by the Greek pagan Aristotle, not the Bible. And when it comes to verifiable claims like the existence of God, both empiricism and rationalism have to work together. You need data for logic to process. Without the raw material of evidence, rationalism is just empty foundationalism. That's where my opponents fail. They've got no methodology but no content. They've got methodology but no content, sorry. And to make this even clearer, imagine a study on gender affirming care that simply asserted surgery works without any data, just a methodology based on pure intuition. Would my opponents accept that as truth? Would they become pro trans based on that alone? Of course not. So, why should anyone accept their claims about God when they rely on the same kind of baseless methodology? If one is irrational, so is the other. And the last thing I want to touch on is God's epistemology. Where does God's knowledge come from? My opponents argue that God is the source of all knowledge and that knowledge must have a foundation. But what is God's foundation? If we truly wish to play the game of filling gaps of knowledge and finding answers to everything, surely God's foundation for knowledge must be accounted for. So I do also ask my opponents, where does God get his knowledge from? Because it surely isn't us. Those are the top three arguments I'm putting forward against the claim that God's existence is knowable. What I hope to get from this debate are clear, direct answers to simple foundational questions. I know both theists and atheists tend to bury their points under verbose philosophical jargon, but me and my partner are here to cut through that. We're here for clarity, and we're betting the audience is too. So make me believe. I am all ears.
Thank you, Paul. Bones to you.
All right. So I am Bones of Doom, a part-time political streamer, a part-time sandworm enthusiast, if you play Dune Awakening, and a part-time mediocre WoW player. The following debate discusses whether God is noble. In the past, both Wi-Fi Gospel and Jeff both subscribed to the tag argument, which I expect them to utilize in this debate as well. On its own, the argument is logically valid, but there are a few issues with it, with the way it is both utilized as well as whether it is actually sound. In particular, I'm going to be debating on P1 of that, which is if the Christian God does not exist, then logic, morality, and knowledge are unintelligible, per the regressive form of that argument. The assertion that God is the only source of objective knowledge is self-defeating, as the validity of the claim depends on God's existence, which is already the subject of debate. Per the problem of the criterion, the theist answer to the question of how we obtain knowledge is divine revelation, which cannot work because it introduces a viciously circular argument of we know God exists because God revealed the knowledge of himself to us. Moreover, tag is not an argument that is exclusive to Christian theology, as my partner kind of demonstrated a little bit here. It means that this argument can also argue for the existence of other deities, whether existing, non existent, or will exist in the future as a product of human minds, which entails the need for a discussion on why the Christian God specifically is noble when compared to other deity concepts. The final point I'll make here is that the God concept described by Jeff and Wi-Fi Gospel cannot exist. The Christian God cannot be all of the following: omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent, as well as a few other traits: eternal, transcendent, immanent creator, just, personal, immutable, sovereign. The most concise way to put this is that despite having all knowledge, limitless power, and who is perfectly good, God has somehow created an imperfect world that has allowed for the existence of evil and gratuitous suffering. In short, I do not believe that we can actually know whether the Christian God exists unless my opponents today can not only prove that a generic deity can exist, but that God himself can also exist and that he also holds all possible knowledge here. And that's it.
Thank you, Bones. And Alex to you.
All right. All right. So the existence of God is knowable because theonomous epistemology is the necessary precondition for the possibility of knowledge. Without God, you're left with autonomous epistemology. You start with yourself using the necessary tools needed to gather knowledge, and then try to justify those tools by referring back to the very tools you are trying to justify. It goes like this. You're lost in the woods, so you pull out the only compass you own. It points north. To see if it's trustworthy, you shake it, lay it flat again, and look, it still points the same way. Theonomous epistemology is like this. Before pulling out your compass, you check the evening sky and spot Polaris, the North Star. You line the compass up with that fixed celestial reference, and when the needle disagrees with the star, you immediately know the compass, not the star, is off, and you adjust course. If there is a God who created and sustained the world and everything in it, a God who created us to know him, the world, and each other, then we can use our senses, reason, memory, testimony of others, etc., to know things. We can justify the use of our reasoning tools not by referring back to those tools, but by pointing to the creator of those tools. If you try to remove God from the equation, you end up in a vicious circle, unable to justify your epistemology. Here's how. If knowledge is possible, the existence of God is knowable. Knowledge is possible, therefore, the existence of God is knowable. This is known as modus ponens. And what's the justification for P1? Either God is a necessary condition for the possibility of knowledge, A, or not A. It is not the case that God is not necessary, not A. Therefore, God is a necessary condition, A. This is known as a disjunctive syllogism, and it uses a valid inference rule known as double negation elimination, which is upheld by the law of excluded middle. Something important to understand is that I just made a positive case for the claim that yes, the existence of God is knowable. Now it's our opponent's job to try to poke holes in my argument. Not a straw man, not somebody else's argument, my argument. The only way they can do this is by showing that knowledge is possible without God. Let's quickly talk about how they will try to do this. They may appeal to empiricism and say we know things through our senses, but this assumes the reliability of the senses, which cannot be proven without using the senses themselves. That's circular. You're using your eyes to test your eyes. Or they may appeal to rationalism, claiming we know through reason. But again, this assumes that reason is reliable, and attempts to prove that using reason are equally circular. You're going to use your mind to validate your mind. In both cases, empiricism and rationalism depend on the very faculties they're trying to justify. Unless they can escape that loop, they can't offer a non circular foundation for knowledge. Most likely, they will appeal to epistemic pluralism, claiming that no single source of knowledge needs to do all the work. That truth emerges from a web of methods, memory, intuition, testimony, perception, and so on. But pluralism doesn't solve the problem, it just spreads it around. If none of the sources can stand on their own, and each depends on the others for validation, then the system is just a loop of mutual dependence. You haven't avoided circularity, you just made the circle bigger. Remember my compass example? You check the first one, its needle settles on what it claims is north. After a shake, it still points the same way. You repeat the process with 3 more compasses, and each lines up with the other. At that point, you conclude, since they all agree, this must be true north. But all you've really done is assume that shared consensus equals accuracy. Even worse, let's say one compass points to a different north. How do you know which compass is right? Is it the 3 that agree just because they agree? Or is it the different compass because all 3 could have the same error? And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. And Jeff, to you.
Thank you, Sarah, so much for having us, and thank you, my opponents, for being here. Alex, always great to debate with you, man. Happy to have you as my partner. So I think they're going to be demanding for empirical data here, which I think is fair. The demand for provability assumes a standard, such as inductive reasoning and abstract thought. If they're denying God, then I have to ask them why nature is uniform or why abstract thought reliably corresponds to reality. The transcendental argument for God starts with the undeniable facts of human experience. We use inductive reasoning, expecting the sun to rise tomorrow, and abstract thought, grasping mathematical truths. Hume's problem of induction shows that induction lacks a non circular justification, as Alex points out. A purposeful, intelligent design grounded in God explains why nature is uniform and why human minds reliably align with reality. So my argument goes like this. The laws of logic are abstract, immaterial, universal, and necessary. Abstract, immaterial, universal, and necessary entities require a metaphysical ground. Only a necessary, immaterial, universal mind, aka God, can serve as such a ground. These function and exist as described, therefore, God is the necessary and God exists. And I'll leave it there.
Perfect. Thank you, gentlemen, all of you, for your opening statements. As a kind reminder to the audience, we will get through the debate, then we will move into closing statements. We will read and respond to your kind super chats that you send in during that time. And then afterwards, of course, our favorite part, we will go into open panel dumpster fire. So if you do have something to add to the conversation, you'd like to join the panel later, hang tight, stick around, and we'll be dropping that link in when it's time. All right, gentlemen, the floor is now open to you.
All right, Alex, I'm going to ask you a quick question right here. Did you utilize sense data to perceive God? I'm curious.
Locally, yes.
So by that you mean you have imperfect data right here to perceive a being, right? How do I know that you're not fallible here?
Yeah, no, approximately yes, but ultimately the only reason we know we can trust our senses is because God created us to know Him and to know the world.
Something I want to
And,
get.
and how do you know that?
Something I kind of
Because
want to. Oh, sorry.
well, I'll just answer in this question. The contrary of the impossibility of the contrary.
And so, do you realize that there could be other deities that we could point to right here that could actually be the source of knowledge right here? Like I could say that
Sure.
Brahman, who's not a personal deity in any way, like we can go to the Hindu gods here, Brahman.
And the spaghetti.
How do I
monster
not
that
know
I
that
brought up.
he's not the foundation of all reality here?
Yeah, and for this debate, that would suffice for the prompt.
So you would just deny the Christian God, and it would instead be the Hindu God.
I wouldn't deny the Christian God. I would say that either for this prompt would be plausible, and so therefore the prompt would be answered with a yes.
Something I want to
But
make sure.
But you're arguing for Christianity here, the Christian God specifically, no?
No, not in this debate.
So, okay. Yeah, Paul, you can go ahead.
I just wanted to set the frame real quick here. What do we mean by knowledge? Are we talking about empirical knowledge, absolute knowledge, some other kind that we might not be aware of, or?
I would say justified true belief is sufficient for this discussion.
So how do you know it's justified?
That what is justified?
How do you know that your belief in God is justified? Because the biggest issue that I have with the transcendental argument for God is that it presupposes God. You can't really do that to make it logically coherent. You know?
It doesn't presuppose God, right? It's starting with human experience, inductive reasoning, and logic. So we would, if you want to just call that knowledge, like mathematics and those types of things, that's what would be.
So,
can you
so
repeat
with
the
someone who's
can you
just
repeat the
born
premises?
know what a God is based off of any sense data that they have, or any perceptions that they have?
Can you repeat the premises for the tag? I'll just call it the tag for the sake of.
Well, it looks
being
like we're
easier.
having two separate conversations here. Let's make it a
Yeah.
little bit ordered.
Should
Sorry,
I
I forgot.
Yeah.
Bones.
Yeah.
Bones. If you looks like Bones asked Jeff a question. If you guys want to go down that line of reasoning, and we'll come back to us,
Oh,
Paul.
I didn't know if he was asking me or I got two questions.
I mean, I'm asking the both of you, really, like, or really, I guess Jeff in this case, but like, how do you know that the baby that was just born has knowledge of God at that point, then, or of any deity for that matter?
It could probably make mouth sounds. You might not consider that like knowledge in a sense of making words and things like that. But that's
so in short, we can't know. Then is what you're saying. We can't.
The
really
baby
know
has a justified true belief in God.
I don't believe in justified true belief.
What would you define?
Your problems demonstrate that that's a absolute crack of shit.
I mean, what do you define knowledge as in this case?
Again, I would just look at like logic, spatio-temporal words, meaning.
You define knowledge. You define knowledge as logic, space, temporal,
like transcendental categories. That would all be knowledge. How we know we're here, how we know this is reality, how we interact with it.
Okay, so when it comes to the being that's on a whole other plane, the transcendental God, how do we know that though? How do we perceive it? Is it just revealed to you somehow, or
through divine revelation?
And how do you get divine revelation?
You participate in the sacraments.
What?
You participate in the sacraments of the religion. So you pray and you go to church and this and that.
So
I've gone to church.
I don't. Go ahead, Paul.
I've prayed and gone to church for most of my life up until a few years ago, and I never got any kind of divine revelation. For instance, why is it only shown to some people and not others?
What got you out of it? Just out of curiosity.
Just kind of eventually fell out of it, to be honest. I kind of became agnostic for a while and then kind of came to where my position is now. I didn't think about God for a few years, and then tried to believe in it again because admittedly I do have like a little bit of anxiety over the concept of death,
Mhm.
but I just can't bring myself to believe it, and I can't bring myself to like not believe it at the same time just because there's no proof one way or the other to be able to justify the existence of God or the lack of the existence of God.
Well, I would say again, like in this case, we could just use logic, for instance, would be a proof, right? That'd be a philosophical proof for God. I
No.
get you want something like empirical. A lot of people who pray and are earnest about it have personal experience. So we would call that testimony. That's usually the empirical data a theist would give to you.
The empirical data is praying.
So
No,
to
no,
kind
I'm
of bring
saying
it
the
back to,
testimony itself, like what the person went through that got them to God. Like
so do
usually,
you
So
think, so do you both agree that God provides absolute knowledge though? Or he's the source of it rather?
I would
Yeah.
say he's the source of it. I wouldn't say that mean therefore we have absolute knowledge. I think as human beings we're fallible. We can make mistakes. We can misspeak. This happens all the time.
and
I
would
have to
God.
take L's too. You know,
So
like,
then
I'm not a perfect being, right?
so then in that case you can never for certain prove that a God exists then. Or your God
Yes, you
exists
can
really.
using talent.
Yeah, I would say
Wait, so
that
then
tag
that would
proves the
be an
necessity.
absolute knowledge claim
I
then.
think what Jeff's trying to say is that absolute knowledge within, say, realms of like empirical data. How do we know that we're on a Zoom call or a debate right now, right? We're not infallibilists in that sense, right? We could use fallibilism to understand that and to have first order knowledge. But what tag does is it shows the necessary of God by bringing it to the second order, right? So when you say things like, I know that we're having a debate right now, there's a second order claim smuggled in there that knowledge exists. Now, within autonomous reasoning, within autonomous epistemology, you can't escape the first and second order claims. You collapse them. So, our question back to you is, how would you justify your epistemology
Are you saying absolutely or to
in
or
any
not?
way?
I mean, to some degree, if, to go back to like, I know I'm in a debate right here. I have previous knowledge that my sense data can relatively tell me like where I'm at in my room. I'm sitting at my desk. There's a camera that's on. I'm in a call with a bunch of people, and we are discussing a certain topic. All of that leads to me to believe that it is most likely the case that we're having a debate. And so I'm engaging with it, knowing that there could be like a 0.0000001% chance that we're either in a simulation or like someone's playing me and I'm an NPC.
Yeah, so it sounds
But
like you're using pluralism there. Is that correct?
sure.
Okay. So even within pluralism, like you said, there are different things. You pointed to memory and perception.
Mm-hmm.
But when we separate them, right? Because if you're using one to validate the other, when you're trying to validate perception just using yourself, how would you do that without also using your perception?
How would I say that question again? Sorry.
Yeah. So just to put it in a different way, how would you validate your senses, that your senses are reliable, giving you reliable information without first using your senses?
I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, you can't really like justify absolutely anything. Like, and
Well,
I
that's
completely agree with that. But I also don't think that you
Can you
guys can really do that either.
justify
I don't
that?
think you guys. I don't think you guys. You can always claim that. You can claim it, but you can't really prove it. Are you familiar with Munchausen's trilema?
Well, before we move off
Wait,
of
wait.
that,
Are you familiar with that though? I'm
well,
curious.
I just yes, there's
Okay,
three
so
horns on the dilemma, right?
so you understand that you can either end up in a circular argument, a regressive argument, or a dogmatic argument, correct?
Yes, and theonomous
So
epistemology
so how
escapes.
does yeah,
But
so how does
when
it
you
escape
didn't,
then?
I just before we move on, are you agreeing that you were not able to justify your epistemology?
I cannot absolutely justify it.
Well,
I can justify
well,
it
yeah,
to
that's
a sufficient degree to where it would be good for or would be sufficient for all of us to understand that we're like
does a
here.
circular
I don't think
argument
I don't
does a circular argument justify anything at all?
I mean
it depends on
I wouldn't
how
say it's
are you
circular. I would say it would be regressive. I would just say that I would justify some things like ad infinitum. Like at some point it breaks down, but
Could could you show me how justifying your senses using your senses isn't circular?
how it isn't circular. I mean,
Sure.
that specifically could be, but I'm also talking about the fact that you guys also have you guys are also utilizing your senses too. You're interacting with the world. I'm interacting with the world, and it's not just my sense data, but other sense data, and the fact that or not millions, but hundreds of other people are utilizing it as well. Like, of course, that doesn't escape like circularity right here, but I'm just saying that that's just something that I accept as a part of Munchausen's trilemma.
Something I
Well,
do want to kind of bring up is the concept of, I think it's called the problem of the criterion, which is where does knowledge begin? At a certain point, when it comes to something like our senses or our memory, it is inevitably going to become circular, because the best thing you could do is just point at our eyes and say, that's where we get our visual data from and stuff, right? The issue is, when it comes to the transcendental argument of God, you don't really have a starting point where you can point at how to justify God's existence. Does that make sense?
yes, we do. It's a necessary starting point.
Yeah.
It's God.
Why?
Because without it, you fall into circular reasoning like you just did.
Well, yeah. And is
So
that
you can
bad?
also fall into circular reasoning with God. Like you just
Is-
justify God
Yes.
because he
It's not
exists.
Well,
Is
yeah, that's the
making
issue with
fallacious
the-
arguments
Yeah,
bad?
yeah. God revealed to you that he existed. Like that. How's that not circular?
Because if
Exactly.
he didn't, we wouldn't have knowledge.
Says who?
So the argument that I gave, do you have a problem
Yeah,
with the
so did-
premises? I can give them again if you'd like.
Yeah, we have a problem with premise one. That's what
Okay.
the entire debate's
Yeah.
going to
So,
be.
Do you
real
remember
quick,
what my justification is? Just let me finish this real quick, and then
Yeah,
I'll
go
send
ahead,
it
go
off to
ahead.
you, Jeff. Do you remember
Yeah.
what the justification for
Yeah,
the
your,
one is that I
your
gave?
justification is divine revelation. Like that's what you guys
No.
are arguing.
Was
for.
it the impossible of the
It was-
contrary?
It was a true
Or, yeah.
disjunct.
True what?
So it was a disjunctive syllogism that relies on the double negation elimination inference.
Can you say that more clearly for the audience and
Yeah.
us?
Let me pull it back up. All right.
No, I
So
mean like
after-
this. I mean like break it down into layman's terms.
Well, that would be, if I was a great teacher, I'd be able to do that very easily. But I'm not a great teacher.
I mean, you can
so
do your best. It's okay.
a disjunctive syllogism is either A or not A, right? It's either or. It's like it's basically the law of excluded middle. It
Yeah.
either has to be true or it isn't true. I would say that this disjunct, which follows the double negation elimination inference, which is basically you can, I have a definition here actually. The rule that from not P, one may infer P. It captures the classical principle that negating a negation restores the original affirmation and undergirds proofs by contradiction used throughout argument. And so the double negation elimination happens right here. Sorry, my notes are long. I'm scrolling back up.
You're good.
Oh, you're good.
Either God is a necessary condition for the possibility of knowledge or not. It is not the case that God is not necessary. So the inference there would turn around and say, unless you can provide a different necessary condition for the possibility of knowledge, then it's God.
Isn't there a third option though, which is showing some intellectual humility and saying I don't know, which is kind of
I
my
don't know is
stance
not
on
an
it. I
argument.
don't know whether God exists or not, so I can't have belief or disbelief. And I've argued with atheists about this before as well, by the way. So it's not like I'm a secret atheist or something like that, right?
Yeah, no, and I actually really appreciate that, because most atheists, you might like this term, are lack theists, right? So they kind of hide behind atheism, but I think I've heard it from Graham Oppie. I don't know if he coined the term, but they lack a belief, which is same thing
Yeah.
kind of what you're saying, but you're actually using the better term, which is agnosticism. So I do appreciate
Yeah.
that. But I would say I think we had a little bit of misunderstanding, because you're saying, well, isn't it more intellectually honest to say I don't know? The problem is maybe with God, sure. Right, if that's where you want to take that. But it's not when it comes to knowledge. Because saying, I don't know that knowledge is possible would actually put you in a bad place. And I don't think you would say that, right?
Well,
that's
the prompt
like the
is God
skeptics.
knowable? We're not talking about necessarily the start of knowledge. We're talking about whether God is knowable. That's a little bit of a
Right.
different discussion, I think.
Well,
No,
that's the
it's
whole
what
argument.
Tag's trying to get. Yeah, it's what Tag's trying to get a hold of.
Yeah. That God is the necessary precondition for knowledge.
Okay.
So if you were to say, I don't know that knowledge is possible, we could talk about that, but I don't want to strawman you, because I don't think that's your position.
I would
I
say,
think
what do
I
you
think
mean
the
knowledge is
real claim
possible? Like
is-
it exists, or
Yeah, so
I just-
that you
yeah.
you can have knowledge. It's possible for you to have knowledge.
okay, and knowledge is just justified true belief?
Correct.
And how can you not have that without God? Like, what if the entire universe just got created by accident? What if that impossible
that's a good
thing
term.
actually is possible?
Yeah, because if
Someone,
everything was created by accident, right? So accidentalism, then you wouldn't have intention behind the universe, right?
it'd also be astronomically impossible if you look into like physics, gravity, mathematics, all these things. They are so precise that it seems like it has intelligent design.
Well, it
I would
seems
honestly
like it.
stay away from the ID argument right here, specifically because life is
I have to stay away.
really it's one really inefficient, and two like all sorts of like one negative there's negative aspects of life where there's things that are harmful that have developed over the course of I guess the universe's existence. The fact that life seems to be pretty scarce as it is, and the fact that in a certain range within our solar system, there can only be like a habitable zone for beings to exist or for life to exist, and that even though we just so happen to be in that area, there's all sorts of places where that can't happen. And also the fact that the sun harms us a bunch with its radiation. Like there's all sorts of things where you can go down. I just don't think it's a really good argument to go down, in my opinion, but we can discuss that on a different time.
Since I just went off for a little bit, Jeff, I did say that we were going to come back to you on something, and we can put a pin in the knowledge argument. I'm sure we have most of the debate left. I'm sure we'll come right back to that. But there was
Yeah.
something earlier you were saying. Do you remember?
I just wanted to address the non-circularity real quick, just so we can get out of that argument, at least on our end, because tag avoids circularity by showing that denying God renders rational inquiry incoherent. So without a rational, purposeful God, logic laws become brutal fact, induction lacks justification per Hume's challenge, and free will undermines moral responsibility. The critics' charge of recursion misreads Tag's method, which justifies rationality by presupposing God as its foundation, not assuming rationality to prove God. I know that's a bunch of words,
And
but hopefully get
but
that.
the problem is that you only know this through like what God revealed to you. Like when I say that God revealed X to me through divine revelation, and I only know this because God exists, we could make the claim God exists because He revealed it to me. And at that point, that's where we get into the vicious circularity right there. That's my issue right there, is specifically with divine revelation.
But that's getting out of Tag. How we can access God is a different question than how we can know God, right?
Well, I
Tag
mean,
said-
aren't those two things kind of
If the only
interchangeable in a way?
reason you're
Because the
able
only
to
way
get
we can
knowledge
know.
is because He
Right.
has access to you, then
Right.
that presupposes that He has access to you. Like that, you're smuggling that in. That's when I said in my opening statement that the argument on its own is valid, but when you're starting to smuggle in these terms here now it can't become valid because now you're sitting here assuming
now
the
you're
conclusion.
asking a second order though, and if we're going into first order. God's existence, His nature exists, like knowledge exists, and then when we ask, well, how do we know that? We're moving into divine revelation and something. So we're moving away from Tag. We're not even addressing Tag. It's a different argument.
Well, no, you use divine revelation to make Tag sound, is what I'm saying. You're saying that P1 is true because of divine revelation.
No.
Or sorry, not P1, but that you're assuming the conclusion to be true.
Using human experience. So I'd be using the laws of logic.
Which you already agree that human experience is fallible, and in which case, like, how do we know that it wasn't, say, the devil talking to you in this case?
Could be. It's very possible.
So we can't really know whether it's God or the devil in this case. No.
Well, we can discern, right? If Satan was going to try and trick you, and theology taught you how, don't you think you could learn how to be untricked?
I mean, potentially, but either way, like we can take this further. Like if you go into the Bible, like what if the Bible was actually created not by God, but by the devil himself to, further entrench himself in tricking you?
That'd be a misrepresentation of the Bible.
And you would say that misrepresenting the Bible would be like in this case, I used to be Catholic, so I'm going to use those terms, a cardinal sin, perhaps.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, we probably have some alignment. Because, I mean, Orthodox Catholic, but
yeah, the first schism, not the weird Protestant schism.
Let me repeat the tag real quick and see if we can kind of poke some holes into it real quick. So premise 1, knowledge, logic, and reason exist. Premise 2, these things cannot exist without God. 3, therefore the existence of knowledge, logic, and reason prove that God exists. Does that sound about right?
That
No.
may be, but I haven't gone
No,
into that specific one, so I would just use the one that I gave.
Do
It-
you guys use
Can
either
you repeat?
is it the progressive or the regressive version of tag? Because I've got the regressive version pulled up as well.
Yeah, so
I
your
would
P1
just-
and P2 is actually just P1. It's if necessarily X, therefore Y therefore X.
Yeah, I can give the progressive argument real quick because I think is that what y'all are using?
I mean, for me, I would just use the one I gave in my opening statement. If knowledge is possible, the existence of God is knowable. Knowledge is possible. Therefore, the existence of God is knowable. And then followed up with the disjunctive syllogism.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Well, there's
Yeah,
a big
Yeah, I
leap
think you
between.
guys are using the progressive argument.
I would use
Yeah,
it
let's just.
possibly if
Sorry.
necessarily Y. I'd use that.
Okay. I would just say there's a big leap between knowledge and stuff exists, and then what was it you said? Since knowledge exists, God is knowable. Was that it or?
Yeah, if knowledge is possible, the existence of God is knowable.
Well, but the issue is God is on a whole other plane of existence. So when we're talking about knowable, I set the frame with empirical knowledge. Let me try to get some sort of like agreement here, just so we can try to make sure we're all good faith. Can you agree it's not empirically possible to prove or disprove God?
I wouldn't say impossible, but for the purpose of this debate, since I'm not defending the Christian God, I wouldn't invoke Christ. So maybe empirically that way you could do it. So that's why I refrain from saying impossible. But I wouldn't say that tag is an empiric proof of God. No.
I'm not even speaking necessarily about
Yeah,
the
tag is
Christian
just
God.
the
I'm
one.
talking about God, any kind of cosmic designer that's out there. Can you empirically prove that there is something above our realm of existence that created everything?
Yeah, because it's a necessary precondition. So the very moment that you admit that knowledge exists, you have to justify that at the second order. And you can't do that without positing God.
Well, you
It's
have to.
possible that the
Oh, okay.
universe could have always existed and that it was never created in the first place.
Okay, and how does that justify the second order of knowledge? Because you're still stuck in
Like,
autonomous reasoning at that point.
how-
Well, yeah, we're kind of going to be
Well,
going
yeah,
into
no.
like circular reasoning and kind of pushing back and back forever, because then what created God, and whatever created God, what created that, and you could just go back and back forever. There are some things where I just think you have to show some sort of intellectual humility and be able to say, I don't know. And that's kind of
Right.
the point that I try to
And
get
to
across
kind
to
of-
both theists and atheists.
Well,
and to kind
the
of
nice-
piggyback off of that, if you say that God is the necessary precondition, the God defeating hammer is actually the precondition for the universe, and that's what justifies all knowledge for me. Then, like, how do you square that?
Yeah, and I totally understand where you're coming from. This is a popular move that people use as an objection to tag.
Mhm.
And what I would say, especially for the premise of this debate, you're turning this hammer into God and saying, well, it's not your God, it's this God that's the hammer.
It could be any God.
Well, for
Yeah,
the purpose
sure,
of this
that's
debate,
fair.
I'm willing to grant that.
What are the properties of God then? I'm curious. Like, what do you think
So,
the properties of God
yeah,
are?
I came up with a definition of God for the use of this debate. A necessary and absolute universal mind that has created and sustains the universe. Because without that, you wouldn't actually have a God that could grant knowledge.
In that case, I could just say that there's some sort of machine that's created the universe and it doesn't require mind.
We could be in a simulation.
Yeah, and so how would that mind actually grant you knowledge?
That it's not a mind that grants knowledge. It's just
sorry, the machine.
Yeah, how's
the machine itself. What it does is it provides us not absolute knowledge. I'm not saying that there are any absolute knowledge claims, but that we can through, again, you're going to have an issue with this, but our sense data, through that we can have a pretty good idea of what we're talking about here, or of what reality is. And we'll never, and I don't think you understand this yet, but we can't have absolute knowledge. That's my claim right there.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. I was about
that
to.
an
there's no
absolute
possibility
knowledge
That's
that-
claim?
absolute, though.
I don't know that. That's the thing. I don't know that.
Maybe
you
we
can't
can
say-
have absolute knowledge, but
I just
based
don't.
on
I
the.
just
say
don't
that then.
believe.
I
Well,
don't think
You
we
can't
as
say I
alcohol-
don't
Well, then
know
what-
that we can't have absolute knowledge.
I don't believe that we can have
Why?
absolute knowledge. Like it.
All right, so you're saying that you don't believe, and then you're also saying a universal. So which one is it?
I don't believe we can have absolute knowledge.
Are
that's
beliefs
the statement.
universal?
No, I don't think there's anything that I can say that's really universal per se, unless
So then,
Don't you think
unless
the
we
laws
could
of
appeal to like
logic
the laws of logic being universal in like a classical sense.
so
I
then
think
the
they would be, yeah.
statement.
We just assume that to be true just because we all tend to agree that it's true for the sake of a conversation.
I
So
just
if
want to make
if
sure
we
you
all
got.
agreed, for the sake of argument, that God existed, would it then therefore be justified to believe in his existence?
Um,
Because most people do.
Can you repeat that question real quick?
if not necessarily, no. Like I'm just saying that like for the sake of a conversation, we have to start somewhere in this case. And since we don't agree with that statement on this panel, we have to kind of hash that out. What I'm saying is that to some degree, like if people are having a conversation, then it is a good idea to have a foundation. And at this point, going back to the trilemma that I was talking about earlier, you can either have an axiom that you can point back to as like the start for everything. You could either just justify things ad infinitum, like this it justifies this, or you could go into like a vicious circularity, which is, and I'm saying that like that's why we can't have absolute knowledge, is that because everything has either terminates somewhere or it regresses into something that's not satisfactory.
Something
And
else I
as
kind
mu-
of want to ask real quick is that none of us agree that we can have absolute knowledge, like unchanging, perfect, flawless knowledge. Is that something that any of us believe we are able to eventually obtain?
Us as humans,
Yeah.
no.
What was
well,
that?
well,
We
like you
couldn't
said,
as
Jeff,
a
with
human.
tag, you would say tag is absolute. It's
Well,
absolutely
yeah.
true.
So you would say
Right,
tag
that's one form of
is
knowledge
pointing
that
to an
we have.
absolute truth, yes.
We're
But
not
that's
infallibilists, meaning you
right.
can only know absolute truth, but there is some things that are absolutely true.
The way
And
I'm
you believe?
understanding, I might be misunderstanding the question, but I don't think us as human beings can have absolute truth. I think we can have access to something that does through tag and God. So that might
But
be
then my
Would you
question
say
is,
knowledge of
how do
God
we
is
know
absolute?
that it's absolutely true? Like how can we know that the knowledge being provided is absolutely true without having to presuppose that there's an
we
absolute truth giver?
yeah. So we could look at the laws of logic. A thing can only be a thing, right? Can't have a contradiction, no exclude middle. That seems universal, right? And absolute. And it applies everywhere. It's not just in America, it's in the UK, it's in Africa. It seems to be something that even in Ethiopia, it still exists, right? It's still something that we can demonstrate.
Yeah, but also it doesn't necessarily imply that God kind of instantiated that. We and at some point, because of human language and the fact that we're only able to parse so much information out to other people, at some point it all breaks down. Is what I'm saying. It all has to break down somewhere, and where I where I see that your view breaks down is in the fact that you guys use divine revelation, or at least you do, Jeff. Specifically use divine revelation.
It is also a God of the gaps thing, because when we're asking questions like what started the universe and all this kinds of stuff, what could have created this perfect cosmic world, or whatever you guys say about like how everything's playing out and all like that, we just fill in God because it's like we don't really have another answer. And what I just kind of want, like I said with my opening statement, is try to get across the point, and maybe you guys can eventually agree to maybe lean more agnostic Christian or agnostic theist kind of thing, right? Like, I don't have any issue with the concept of believing in God or anything like that, but when you say it's knowable, I do just have to push back on that, just because of the fact that there's no way we can visibly see, measure, or verify anything that exists beyond our current material plane.
Well, and earlier in the debate, you said that we don't have to rely strictly on empiricism, but it seems like you just levied that as a standard against God.
Did I say that?
You
Yeah,
know
you're
what? I think
looking at measurable. You're looking at unverifiable, but that would also apply to morality and a bunch of things.
I'm an
maybe I
egoist, so yes, I agree. Morality doesn't really exist. So
maybe I misunderstood your
Oh,
opening, but would you
so
say
I
that we can?
in Papua New Guinea then.
what was that?
I should
Well,
tell you about an island in Papua New Guinea then.
I don't know. I
I'm
don't know
sure
what
you've
they're
heard
referring
of
to.
it.
I'm sorry.
Alex probably knows. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
we don't have to go into that because we're not doing.
Yeah. That's a whole other debate for another day.
a whole
No,
nother.
what we can
another
probably say is that via empiricism, that's one way where it can fail. The other way that God can fail is through just what I'm saying is
Well,
presuppositionalism.
I wouldn't grant that God fails in empiricism. I would just say that within the empirical system itself, you're not going to pick up a piece of God and evaluate it. But
Yeah, which means that
to justify
which
the actual
makes him not
system,
falsifiable in an empirical realm. No, like
well,
you can't really do that.
maybe, but at a system level, at a meta epistemic level, when you're grounding empiricism as a whole, you can't do so without God, which is the whole argument I'm trying to make here.
But the problem is that now you're
It's gotta the
defining it like empiricism specifically. It's not a perfect framework either, and you're saying that
Right.
you're grounding imperfect frameworks with the perfect creator. I don't know how that
Well,
squares
for
itself up.
example, we both have microphones in front of us, and we're using
Correct.
empiricism to understand that, at least in part. So I would say that empiricism plays a part in epistemology. It's not everything. But at the second order level, the justification of empiricism, unless you posit God, you can't do so. You're just stuck to yourself. So it's like my compass example, right? God is the North Star in that example. If you don't have the North Star and you're stuck alone in the woods with just a compass, all you can do is keep shaking your compass. And maybe if it lands in the same spot twice, then because it landed twice, you think that justifies that spot is north.
I mean, to kind of use that analogy, even the North Star is imperfect because compasses, the accuracy of them breaks down as you're reaching the North or South Pole here. Like there's like even that in this analogy, like I don't think that.
I don't think any analogy is perfect, especially when it comes to something like God. No, I get
Right,
it. Because I was
brain
trying.
my brain kind of goes into this like, oh wait, this doesn't work. Like I studied aerospace engineering, so like my brain is fucking like hardwired to like think of a bunch of like random bullshit. It could be like some sort of underlying autism that it hasn't been exposed.
Autism is the new superpower. So.
Quick question for you: if it all breaks down, where does it break down?
What I mentioned earlier at presuppositionalism, I think it breaks down there.
Aren't you presupposing logic though, and reasoning to get there?
To some degree, I would say that believing that the laws of logic are true just be like an axiom that I hold, and that's just because, like you said earlier, that everyone else seems to be able to use it properly here. And I'm going to take the classical view right here and say that this is. I could say that this is universal potentially.
Yeah, just real quick.
I'm not necessarily like beholden to that entirely, but for the sake of this, like we could say that it, classically speaking,
yeah. So if
the laws of logic are true, and that it's always going to apply there, and that I'm justified in holding that belief because it seems to hold up everywhere else.
So if I say God's my axiom, where did I go wrong in my reasoning?
You would need to justify God, and where I said that it breaks down is that you're using God to justify God, which is viciously circular.
No, see, that's not understanding tech at all. I'm using
like that. That's a circular argument, though.
Are axioms justifiable?
Can you read?
Axioms are ultimately like they ultimately are a terminating like concept. Really, they just terminate where knowledge is at some point because we can't really go further than that. At some point, it breaks down beyond that, and we can't really justify everything prior to an axiom.
Right. So if axioms are unjustified, then
you
can choose whatever.
They're unjustified in that like there's nothing holding them up beyond the just holding that belief itself.
So they are the foundation. You can't really go under that. There's just a certain point where you just hit the wall, hit like the floor, and you can't really go any further than that. And that's just kind of parts where everybody kind of has their own subjective, unique axioms and stuff like that. So we're trying to get everything else regarding like God and stuff because there's supposed to be a foundation for God. God can't be the foundation for God. And whenever you say stuff like God is necessary for the precondition of knowledge or something like that, I'm just kind of paraphrasing off the top of my head. That's just a case of the gods of the gaps fallacy as far as I'm concerned, because it's like you kind of have to have an answer for it. God is necessary because we don't have any other answer, because as you've said, the contrary is impossible or something like that, right? Is what you said?
I'm so glad you said that, because when I said that's interesting earlier, I was going to point out that that's exactly what you're doing with this axiom, these laws of logic. This is your own God of the gaps. You're saying, well, we have to assume this logic, this axiom, because we can't, like, it's just necessary. We have to. So if
Assume
I'm
which.
doing a God of the gaps fallacy, that would also be your God of the gaps.
It's not
What's
that
my
it,
God here?
for me, it's not that
Logic.
it is necessary. I just believe it is necessary because all of our conversations kind of necessitate that. So long.
I
as
don't
we
use.
believe
I also
in-
You're
don't
doing
use
that
logic
thing
as
again.
a.
Why do they have to?
Yeah, you're doing that thing again where you believe a universal. Universals aren't beliefs, they're necessary.
These aren't really universals, though. These are just our subjective opinions, which is why I'm agnostic. As I said, I'm not making any like universal claims. These are just arguments and logic
Is
that I
that
have formulated against you guys for the tag.
So wait, if you're using subjective logic, why should I listen to you at all?
I'm not saying you should. I'm asking you questions.
that
Fair enough. I mean,
Well-
fair enough.
well,
It's a
in
interesting-
that case, then
I'm not trying to
you
change
also hold- you
anybody's
also
mind
hold the
from being a
subjective
Christian
logic
here.
to-
I'm asking
Yeah,
questions
no,
about
you're
your
more-
foundation and stuff like that.
yeah, just curious.
you can't get knowledge from subjective logic.
Who says?
Wait, what do you mean by knowledge in this case?
Yeah, that.
Like, do you mean absolute knowledge or like what?
Yeah, so just a justified true belief.
So just a justified true belief.
Right.
Do you
So
believe
if we all use subjective logic, then I can make whatever logic I want. And as long as my justification lines up with my made up logic, then I have knowledge. So therefore I know God exists based on whatever logic I want to use.
Doesn't it depend on who's justifying it, though? It's justified true belief. But what if your belief that you believe is justified is not justified by ours? That's why we're here, obviously.
Right. And that's why subjective logic breaks down, because you can't have two people with opposite knowledge and it both be true.
Yeah, and that's the entire point. Neither of us. I'm not claiming anything to be true. Again, I'm agnostic. I'm not an atheist.
So when you say no, God is not knowable, are you claiming that to be true?
I'm claiming that based on my current faculties that I have, based on the definition of empiricism, empirical knowledge. If we look in the realm of empirical knowledge, which is what everybody basically uses to be able to garner knowledge as we colloquially use it, we cannot know God just because of where he's supposed to be, which is not with us.
And when you say we cannot, you're making a knowledge claim. You're making a universal knowledge claim. Now, if you want to back it up and just say, I don't know, that's a belief, right? Because you don't know it. So therefore it's a belief. Are beliefs aimed at truth?
I would say the closest thing to truth as possible.
All right. So you are
I
saying
mean, a belief
even
is
when you say
it's
belief.
a belief is a proposition, so it does have a truth value.
And belief
Well-
isn't inherently rooted in fact either.
Well, if I believe there's a unicorn in my room, am I justified in believing that?
I mean, you'd have to give me the
Uh,
characteristics of a unicorn and then kind of demonstrate that it exists there.
as
Right.
long as you have a subjective logic system that allows for it, then yes.
I
Well, you
think
can-
I think all systems or logic systems that currently exist are subjective.
Okay. So then I will create my own logic system that says everything is based on God. That's the first axiom. So
And how do you justify
the
that?
reason you chose, well, I don't have to because it's an axiom and it's subjective logic. Again, this is like an internal
Well,
critique.
then
on your-
I could then I could just reject the axiom. Then is what.
right. And
But
so
you
if
don't
we can
reject,
just
you don't
reject
reject
axioms
classical logic is what I'm saying.
as
You
an
don't reject
axiom,
that.
yeah. It's not
Okay.
an
You,
axiom.
but yeah, you have an extra presupposition of God at this
No.
point.
So there's a difference between presuppositions and axioms. Presuppositions can be
Yes,
necessarily true.
Yeah,
Axioms
yeah.
are unjustified.
Well, yeah, you have to justify.
So no, wait,
the
no.
presupposition.
Presuppositions are unjustified. Axioms are justified to a certain degree.
Not at all. I don't know anybody who believes axioms are justified.
You
If
mean
you want to pull up a
ultimately
definition and show
justified.
me, I'll concede. But
Yeah, sure. Hold on.
Let me pull up a definition too. Now that I think about it.
Yes, axiom is statement or proposition which is regarded as being established, accepted, or self-evidently true. Like,
right, self-evidence is not
all
justification.
epistemic claims start with a presumption. So
so it can either be established, accepted, or self-evidently true.
Well,
So it doesn't
established in that
necessarily have to be
context-
self-evidently true. What I'm saying is that it's accepted as being true. We all
Right,
accept
so-
that the law. We all accept
No.
that the laws of logic are true. That the law of identity, non-contradiction, and law of excluded middle are true. No,
Well, we accept. We don't. I don't accept that they're self-evidently true.
no, I never said they were self-evidently true. I said that we
All right.
accepted that they're
So-
true.
So if we all accept something as true, it's true and justified.
we can accept it as true. It is something we all agree upon. That doesn't
Whereas
necessarily mean it is ultimately true, but that we all believe it to be true.
What I
Right, so
think is
it's
kind of the issue
And
is
then
that
it's
you're kind of forcing this into the realm of absolute knowledge when both of us have already said absolute knowledge doesn't exist. Like again, kind of
all
go
right. So
it seems to imply that based on what
you
you're
keep
saying. Like, do
you
you
keep trying to
believe this to
push
be
us
true?
into
Hmm?
you
Go
keep
ahead,
pushing
Bone.
us into this realm of like absolute knowledge right here. We're not making those claims. We can only go so far with this.
don't
You still haven't like found that like foundation. You still haven't provided that. Whether it was Jeff using divine revelation, whether you're saying that it can't be otherwise, like
But
we're not saying that our beliefs are true because it can't be otherwise. It could potentially be that there are
all right,
some
let me
beliefs that
ask it
can be
this
true
way.
otherwise, but you're saying that it can't be on your
Is the
view.
law of non-contradiction a necessary precondition for knowledge?
Not
Hmm.
insofar as how we interact with the world, insofar as how we are able to get further knowledge, it can be like something that is necessary. It can be, but I'm not saying
Uh,
that it is or isn't.
Well, it depends
I'm
on the
saying
thing,
that
doesn't
I
it?
just accept it to be necessary.
yeah, I feel like you're playing fast and loose with terms here. Saying you believe or you think something is necessary is not you're saying I believe a universal.
I accept it as necessary.
So is it necessary or not? Can I have knowledge if the
It
law of
is.
non-contradiction is not true?
Can you have knowledge if the law of non-contradiction is not true? If you've accepted prior that the law of non-contradiction is true, then you can't really have knowledge beyond after that.
All right.
Like if you
If
just
I
reject it,
say
no.
if I reject the law of non-contradiction, can I have knowledge?
Do you accept that the law of non-contradiction is true?
If I say no, hypothetically, because I do accept it as true, but if I say no, the law of non-contradiction does not hold. Can I therefore have
Under
knowledge?
my view, I would say no.
Right. So it is necessary.
I accept it as necessary.
Yeah, but just saying I accept it. So like I could just say I
Yeah,
accept 2 + 2 is 5.
because I don't
I'm
think
not
there's
saying
like
it's true. I just
I
accept it as true.
I don't think there's like I don't think there's like something that provides objective knowledge. I don't think there's anything that provides absolute knowledge here.
would you say
I'm
that's not
accepting that it's
Yeah,
true.
I just want to make
So
sure. Are we gonna still?
you
Are
Whatever
we
have
the
gonna
any
stay in the
whatever
knowledge?
the
realm of
fuzziness
just?
there is below that, like I can't really know, is what I'm saying.
Okay.
I just have
And
to
let me
start from something
reframe.
and build from there.
I
Like
just
no,
want to make sure we're
yeah,
all on the same page. Are you still talking from the justified true belief definition, or are we talking more from the empirical, we can observe and verify position that I brought up?
Well, I
I
think
just want to make sure
empiricism
we're all on the same page here.
empiricism can give you first order knowledge. I never denied that. But the second you say that there is such a thing as first order knowledge, you're implicitly saying there is a thing as knowledge, which is a second order claim. And what I'm trying to do is get you to justify the second order claim without invoking the first order. But because you're stuck at the
you want us
autonomous
to
level,
absolutely justify it.
no, I
You're saying.
just want you to justify it without
So then, what do you mean?
referring back to the first order.
What do you mean by justification then?
Give a reason outside of the first order.
So this just goes back into the Munchausen trilemma again. Like we're
Right.
either going to have to at some point provide a circular argument or regressive argument or dogmatic argument, and that's the same thing with you guys. You still haven't been able to get out of that.
No, and
Yeah. So what I'm hearing, real quick, Jeff, and then I'll let you go. I just
Okay.
want to make a statement. What I've been hearing tonight is that logic is subjective. We don't really know anything. We just need to be skeptical about everything. And
As far as we know, logic is subjective. Yes.
and we just need axioms. And as if we disagree, we can't really have the truth of anything. But that's what I've been hearing tonight. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Jeff.
we can't have absolute truth, not
That's
truth.
the entire point.
That's an absolute truth claim.
Not necessarily. No.
Can you define
And that's
absolute
also
truth claims? What is an absolute truth claim?
What that yeah, so saying you can't do something means it is not possible to do it, correct?
Based on our current faculties, yes, but it can change.
I
I'm
don't
open
think
to it
we
changing.
are
Oh, sorry.
capable of doing this, and that's just because we are limited by our linguistic capability to formulate arguments. If there's some way that we can somehow create other ways to kind of communicate this that somehow escapes this, then sure, like, but that's currently outside of our current realm of knowledge, which is what I'm working on.
So saying it's impossible to have absolute
I'm
truth
saying that it
is
is
not absolutely true.
there could be a 0.00001% chance that it could be the case, but
Okay.
at some
So
point I'm
if
just
I
going to
buy,
say it's unlikely.
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
It's unlikely. No, you're good.
Right,
We can
but I
also
mean, if you have a 0.00001 chance of winning the lottery, does that mean if I buy a ticket, I can't win?
No, that's not what I'm
Right.
saying. I'm saying that
That's my
it is
point.
possible at some point, but it is highly unlikely.
Okay,
You
so
know what?
you
Let me
would take
rephrase.
back
Oh,
that we can't have absolute knowledge.
I'm saying that we cannot currently have access to absolute knowledge.
yeah, that's what I was gonna say. We can let's just rephrase it a bit to fit more of the context of discussion. Currently, with our current faculties and our ability to be able to perceive and verify things, we cannot have absolute knowledge. Could that change in the future? Sure. But as of right now, I currently cannot see a way we can gain that.
All right, so but let me just press more on this. I don't want to get stuck on this, but just press. You're saying currently, with my current resources and abilities, I cannot have absolute knowledge.
Based on the
We do
current
not have
facilities that we have, I would say
Okay.
generally yes.
So with the current facilities that we have, there is zero chance, not 0.00001.
I would say
no.
0.001 maybe. It's a thing where it's like I don't have an answer generally, but this is my current belief based on my current knowledge.
Right.
Because we're
But
still
when you
operating within the realm of our own knowledge, and I'm not like a philosophy major or anything, to be clear.
But when you invoke, neither am I. I'm a high school dropout. But when you invoke that word can't, you're implying impossibility, which is an absolute. Even if you say currently,
We're
even when you
talking
try
more like colloquially. Can't
I mean,
as of right now, and I would say that's generally pretty verifiable, honestly.
honestly, like at the end of it all, what I'm saying is we only really have our subjective experience to go off of. That's it. Like that is the sum of all of our ability to be able to perceive things and be able to manipulate reality to find new knowledge claims, to come up with moral claims, to come up with anything really. We're only limited to that at the moment. We don't have access to other people's subjective experience.
Yeah, I do want to say that it's very pleasant talking to both of you.
Yeah, you guys are good faith. I love it.
Yeah,
We
no, I
appreciate
really
you.
appreciate this. And I want to make sure, because it looks like we have about 30 minutes or so before Sarah gets us into our closing statements. And I want to make sure that at least from our end, right, that we accomplish something here, which is to make sure that I'm saying my arguments clear and also that you're understanding them, not because of any fault of your own, but because of me. So can you try to steal me in tag in the way that I gave it so I make sure you understand it?
So I'm gonna go off the regressive form of the argument just because I have it written down. Or actually, I have both. So what you're saying is that in order to have any sort of knowledge, that it presupposes that something is available to give that knowledge. And in that case, what you're saying is that there's some being that exists, whether we are able to perceive it or not, that provides that. And according to you guys, there can be a multitude of ways where that can be like garnered from. Yeah, is that good enough?
I think that you definitely hit some truths in there and represented it properly at some points. I think the first point, saying that to have any knowledge, you need to have revelation from God, or I would say that I granted first order knowledge, right? Like empiricism could tell us that this microphone is in front of our faces, but I'm bringing it up to the second order, which is where the disjunctive comes in. If you don't have God as the necessary precondition, you're left with yourself, which is where you're right. Munchausen's trilemma. Is it Munchausen?
Munchausen's, I think. Yeah.
And is it also known as Agrippa's trilemma? Is that also? That's the way I've heard it, but I could be wrong.
I don't know actually. I've only heard it as Munchausen. Oh, Agrippa. Yeah.
And so all of these things, I mean, Gettier's problems, Gettier cases, all of these things philosophers have been talking about are right. And I think that that's because we're stuck in autonomous epistemology. So I just want to again repeat the argument, go back to the syllogisms, and I want to find out exactly where you disagree because I want to make sure I understand the point that you're trying to push on. The first one, I should have this memorized by now, but geez. If knowledge is possible, the existence of God is knowable. Knowledge is possible, therefore the existence of God is knowable. And the disjunctive that follows up, usually connected to premise one, where most people don't like that. Either God is a necessary condition for the possibility of knowledge or not. It is not the case that God is not necessary. Therefore, God is a necessary condition. Where in
So,
the premise is the problem?
so we could go back to this. We can just treat a double negation as just the positive claim, correct?
In a sense.
So God is necessary because he is necessary.
Well,
That's where it kind of simplifies to.
yeah, I mean, if you're going to say that that's a tautology, you would also have to say that the law of excluded middle is a tautology. But
Yeah.
in classical logic, double negation elimination is a valid inference.
Yeah, but it's also just tautological too. I can also agree that the laws of logic are tautological too, and we're still kind of in the same place. I
Yeah,
would
but
in that case I wouldn't absolutely like if I were to like take the theist view on this, I wouldn't absolutely know that God is revealing that knowledge to me in that case, just because it's tautologically true, and I could effectively put it on the same pedestal as an axiom in that case. I could.
right. I would grant that to you if you take the view that you're taking that logic is just axiomatic, but I think that gives us huge problems.
Like what?
Like for example, if you want to go back to it, axioms are unjustified. That's what they are. The axioms of
They're
algebra,
yeah. I
right?
can
Like
agree that they're ultimately unjustified, but they're
so
the
the
level of
second
justification that they have is just because most people's or really all humanity's sense data seems to validate this in that it tends to work for everyone.
sounds like a justification.
It
And I have to push back on the nose for everyone because, like, even though 2 + 2 = 4, and we all agree to that, do you think it's a good reason that I say I found that out because Barry Manilow told me in a dream? Like, it kind of pushes into like a ad populum for me.
I mean, yeah, that at some point, like these views just break down, is what I'm saying. Like what I just referred to effectively can become like an ad populum fallacy right there. And what I'm saying is like that could be done under like any theist view, really, and it can really, if I just take the laws of logic to be axioms, like at that point, it does also become an ad populum fallacy. Like
Something I do want to do. I
and
just want to make sure because I really am not like super well versed in philosophy. An axiom is basically just like a foundational belief or something, right? Is that kind of what it is?
I can
Yeah.
give you the definition again. It's a statement of proposition which is regarded as being established, accepted, or self-evidently true.
Okay. So something else I wanted to go to, which was in my opening statement, is the concept of God and his divine knowledge. Because you guys have a point in pushing us on like going to the very beginning, our very foundation and justifying it. But then we have to also look at where you guys are and talk about where God gets his knowledge, which is where it starts getting in the weeds. And this is where I would be pushing both theists and atheists, as I said. There has to be a beginning somewhere, but it's
God is
just
the beginning.
currently it's really difficult to know, or we can't really know. We can't verify or measure it because of the very nature of God. Do you guys have any kind of foundation for where God's knowledge comes from?
From God.
Yeah,
Well,
Isn't that
they
circular?
say that he is the
Yeah.
foundation of all knowledge.
God
To
is the
say
foundation of God.
Really,
So tautologies are validity at some point, because if you're gonna go into the very micro meta, at some point we do have to just say A is A, right?
Well, yeah,
So,
that's kind of the same thing for
yeah,
us.
it's just a limit in logic. That's
but again, because of Hume's challenge of induction, I would just push back on this. If you're going to start with empiricism and say we have knowledge because it seems that way, like I can see that I'm wearing a hat and I can see that there's a microphone in front of me, therefore I'm justified in believing that I'm wearing a hat and there's a microphone in front of me. The issue is that when you're starting with empiricism or naturalism, it doesn't seem to give a good justification or grounding for universal truths. And that's where we push back and say, well, if these are uniform in nature, don't we think that there would be something outside of us that put these into motion? Think of like
So
Yeah,
Aristotle's
there
Mozart.
could be. It's just that we have no evidence for or against that is the thing.
Yeah.
Like again, you kind of just you can ask somebody questions over and over again until they get to the very basis, and then eventually every single person, no matter who it is just going to have to say it's self-evident or we don't know. That's kind of what I'm trying to get out of you guys. Like after a certain point, when we keep asking you questions, like you said, God's foundation for knowledge is God. At a certain point, it inevitably becomes circular and self-evident, right?
I would say no, because necessary preconditions aren't the same as saying that something is self-evident. What does self-evident even mean? It just means that you think it's true.
Yeah, like believing in
That
God.
doesn't really do anything for me.
and
Just to
to
say,
kind of go ahead. Sorry.
no, go ahead.
And to kind of go back to Jeff's claim about empiricism, I don't think any empiricists necessarily claim that there's like an ultimate foundation to like their knowledge. And in this case, when we're talking about let's go back to science here. Let's say we're trying to measure something. Let's say we'll use a ruler an example, and we're trying to figure out how long this. We'll say that this little screwdriver is. There are some tools that have low resolution that could get you to maybe like the 1/8 of an inch. And as you go further and further, you introduce new materials. You introduce marks that are much closer to each other, and you can get to say like 1/28 of an inch. And at some point, like our tools can get a little bit more precise, and we can kind of converge onto a certain value of how long that screwdriver is. But at some point, it breaks down. Whether it's temperature differences, changing the length of the material in both the screwdriver and the ruler that we're using, humidity, et cetera, et cetera. Like there are limits to knowledge, and at some point you can't really like factor it all out, and there's some level of uncertainty in there, and I think most people would just accept that.
The pushback I would have in all of this is to say when we're engaging in tag, we're even asking how words have meaning and going into the ontology of words itself. And so you're already granting yourself a bunch of categories there that tag's trying to demonstrate. So how are you proving a self? How are you proving that you're having experience in spatial temporal? How are we getting to these things without just presupposing them? And that's why I guess a lot of people get upset with tag because it's very, very super meta. It's like the
And
very
the answer I would have is ultimately like I don't know, but what you're doing is you're adding in an extra clause here that God is what gives the knowledge right here, and there's like a certain term for it, but the least amount of like premises and presuppositions or whatever is going to be more likely to be true than not. I forget the exact term for it, but what I'm proposing here is that there at some point we don't know something, and I'm not saying and at some point we things terminate here, but you're saying that it doesn't, and that there's an additional premise that requires that there's something that provides that termination that is satisfactory. And I just wouldn't grant that, and I would say that it's less likely than just not knowing. Yeah, I can
If
rephrase it if that didn't make sense, but
there's something else you wanted to get to too as well, if not, I have something we could go on for the last few
I was
minutes.
gonna do a quick demonstration and
Yeah,
see.
absolutely. Go ahead.
Yeah, you go ahead. I got write it out real quick.
Well, I just wanted to, because I don't know, maybe I misremember, but I don't know if you gave a clear answer on this. Would you say that knowledge exists,
um,
even in a fallibilistic sense?
and if I would say that fallible knowledge would exist, but at some point I would just say I wouldn't know that absolute knowledge could exist.
So then
Well,
you would say something like, I don't know that knowledge exists?
I don't know that ultimate knowledge exists.
what do you mean by exists? I feel like maybe we can end up going on two different pages here if we don't define something like existing.
Right, and maybe, yeah, I mean, that's what all philosophy is about, right?
Yeah.
What is real, man? Um,
Nothing's real, man.
Is
yeah,
anything
I would
real?
say a better way to put it is probably, is knowledge possible? Like the attainment of knowledge.
Um, I would say, in a fallibilistic sense, yes, we can have access to knowledge. Like we can say, like, whether like other panelists would agree or disagree, but we can say that things like evolution is true insofar that we have observed it occur over millions of years, whether through geology, whether through paleontology, or whether we just like study bacteria culture.
Cool.
But
And
it's
so
like there are other, like, let's say like abiogenesis, like the formation of life itself, like we have no clue about, and
and
we
I
don't
would
know like, the minutia in evolution to some degree, but we can still say that it's generally true.
have you ever heard of something called the KK principle?
I've not.
So the
No.
KK principle, and hopefully I don't butcher this. I'm sure somebody will super chat me and tell me I did. That's fine. Um, but it's basically the idea that in order to know something, you have to know that you know it. I don't agree with the KK principle, and many philosophers do not agree with that. So that's not what I'm doing, right? And that's why I grant first order knowledge. I don't think that you have to know that you know in order, or that you have to be aware that you know in order to know something at the first order. But I do think that the second you say that knowledge exists, or that fallible knowledge even is attainable, you're moving to the second order. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So, and that is where I'm trying to say, because getting into like the circularity of empiricism and all of that, which you seem to agree with, and you're trying to just say it's either it's not a big deal because everybody has to do it, is kind of where I'm getting your argument. Um, what
Yeah,
I'm
everyone
trying to
needs to engage with it at some point. I
right,
just I hold Munchausen's trilemma to be like true in this case. Like, I think it does terminate in like a circularity.
right, and but with God being the necessary precondition, could you see how I don't have to invoke a first order knowledge claim to justify the second order?
How so? But yeah,
Right.
how so?
Yes. So, like with empiricism, when you say knowledge exists, and I say, how do you know knowledge exists? You say, because my senses tell me they do, if you were an empiricist. That's invoking the first order to justify the second order. With God, it's saying, I know that knowledge exists because God is the precondition for knowledge. So it's out of the circle. It's recursion. It's not circularity.
So that would just be another part of the trilemma. Then you just say that it recursively is true. You're getting into the regressive argument at that point.
I
So
would,
you
I
agree
was, no, because I'm not invoking that first order claim.
I don't think you need to. You just said it was recursive. No.
Yeah, maybe I'm not using that term correctly, but what I'm trying to say is that with autonomous epistemology, you're not invoking a first order claim trying to prove the second order. Whereas with, or I said with autonomous you are, with theonomous you're not, and that's why it gets out of the dilemma.
Well, the what in this case would be God. No.
Right.
Yeah. So you are invoking the first to prove the second. Then
No,
you're just saying that
God
the
isn't a first
is God.
order. Yeah, God isn't a first order knowledge claim.
No, God exists as a first order knowledge, or really, God gives access to knowledge. Well, that's second order. Hmm.
Yeah, we're saying it's God's nature of being the second.
And then you're saying that God provides knowledge. God provides knowledge is the first order claim. Then
Right. And
that was
something that I've even done myself, right? Because I'm still learning, right? We're all still learning. Uh, is that I would try to say that just basically admit hard solipsism on everything except God's existence, right? And that's how I would argue. And that's just not helpful. It's just not true.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. I wouldn't think that God escapes hard solipsism either. So
and I get into trouble doing that, but hopefully I've learned from my mistakes in the past. Now, where was I going with this? Um, I agree that empiricism is true to an extent, just like you do. I agree that fallibilism is useful, right? Like, if we're off this debate and we're just talking, we're like, man, yesterday I went to the store. I'm not saying like, oh, like, how do I know I went to the store? I could be wrong. No, I know I went to the store, right? So I agree to all of that. What I've learned though is that the problem is much deeper than that, and that's kind of where I'm trying to get at with all of this.
yeah, and I don't think we're probably getting close to the end of the hour and a half mark here
You're
in about a few minutes, but
you're
I,
fine. Usually we actually go to the full 2 hours for the debate
oh,
time frame. Yeah, so if you still have some more to prompt out of that, we could do that. Or if you do want to kind of close that thought and then we can go into open panel, I'm happy to do that as well. But I leave it all up to you guys. Yeah, I
I
think the
mean,
conversation is great. I think you're having a wonderful discussion and getting somewhere with it. So it's totally up to you.
Yeah, I was going to demonstrate real quick. So there was a claim that tag is adding in a premise. So I'm writing it down, and you'll have to forgive me. My handwriting sucks.
I'm
But
not saying that the claim that I'm making is not
adding
adding a
additional
premise. I'm saying that you are in this case. That you guys are adding in a premise on top of tag.
where is it?
You got to focus it.
Yeah, I can't see
So-
it. I'm also
Mm.
got glasses, so I'm kind of blind.
That's not going to work, is it? If necessarily, if possibly,
But I have tag pulled up. I mean,
So
yeah.
our empiricism is obviously stronger than your guys. I mean, we're not wearing glasses. Just
sure. Oh wait, holy shit! Actually,
So
You could
true.
always like write it in the chat maybe, and
Yeah, you're
I don't
right.
know if that will help, but
I'm just looking
Yeah,
at my opening
or
statement.
pull it up on if you put it up on like a Word document, we could like
Here,
share the
I
screen
can-
like that.
I have both forms of the argument. I can just exit full screen. I can throw that in there.
your first mistake was using a notepad. You need a slow boy whiteboard.
There you go. I need a slow boy white
Oh,
button.
cool.
I mean,
I'm not on Jay's level yet.
Some
Though,
point
so.
grab a whiteboard, but yeah.
What
Is
was
this
that?
what you want to pull up
Yeah, whatever. I just sent into
in
chat. We
the
can use either
chat?
the progressive or regressive form. Either way, like I understand that the tag argument itself is logically valid, and I think no one's going to really disagree with that unless they're
Yeah,
really,
yeah.
but what we're saying is
You'd
that
be
you guys are
surprised.
adding in you're implicitly or explicitly
Mm.
adding in a premise that God provides that or God exists. You're just assuming that the conclusion is true in this case.
Well, then that wouldn't be valid, would it?
Yeah, that argument wouldn't be valid, but the tag argument in of itself is logically valid, just not sound, in my opinion.
I don't understand. Are you saying that implicitly we're actually making a different argument?
That implicitly, yes, you're adding in that premise, and that you're making a different argument based on that premise.
Can you show me in my syllogism where I have that premise in?
When you say that God is necessary because He is, that just ends up being a tautology. P is P. In this case, it would just be asserting P as the premise.
Right, but if I was doing that in my syllogism, it wouldn't be valid. Could you show me where I'm putting it in there? Like, where's the premise that I have? Because I understand what you're saying. You're saying like
You're saying
you're actually making it. You're
saying that
sneaking in a. Go ahead.
No, you finish your statement.
I was gonna say like, do you think I'm sneaking it? It seems to me that you say that I'm sneaking in a premise, and I'm just trying to figure out exactly where.
Yeah, me too.
Well, when I say sneaking is like a colloquial thing, but you're
Right,
either explicitly adding it or implicitly adding it. In this case, you explicitly added it. In this case, you're just saying that P is true because P is true.
Well,
And
no.
it's just, it's tautologically true.
So would you say then that all modus ponens is circular?
Modus ponens, yeah, it would terminate should P be true, or P be assumed to be true. In this case, like it's valid.
Right,
I'm
and
not
if
saying
it's
I'm not saying that all of like modus ponens arguments are sound either necessarily.
right, soundness and validity are different, right? For the audience sakes, valid means that if the conclusion follows from the premises, sound means that the premises are also true. So, but what I'm trying to figure out is you're saying it's circular, but you're also saying it's valid. But if it was circular, then the conclusion wouldn't follow from the premise.
I'm saying that it's tautologically true. Like it's that case it's recursive, not circular.
I mean, that would mean just everything is tautologically true.
At some point, most claims, or really all claims, would break down into like tautological claims.
So if all claims are tautologically true and my claim is tautological, what's the problem with that?
I mean, the problem is that it's not a satisfactory answer, really.
So
I don't consider it to be satisfactory because at some point, like there's no real termination point. It just is because it is.
so if my claim is like all claims, then all claims wouldn't be satisfactory.
Yeah, I don't see there. I don't see.
So, and
I don't see where
honestly,
my problem differs here, or where that problem would be different than any other claim.
yeah, I forget exactly who said this, but it was some presuppositional apologist. And he basically said, this is the way you defeat, or maybe it was an atheist. I forget. Anyway, what he was saying is the way you defeat tag is being the ultimate skeptic. Nothing is true, not even the statement that nothing is true. The problem is nobody actually believes that.
Yeah, nobody believes that to be true, but what I'm saying is at some point we have to accept certain things as true, or else we devolve into complete skepticism, which is why I'm saying that
Right.
we eventually have to appeal to dogmatic arguments, or in this case, axioms. Like we have to appeal to something to ground it. And I'm just saying that in this case, we're not saying that it's necessarily God that's grounding it, but probably some set of axioms or
And something popped in my head about axioms I'd like to ask. What mechanism do you use to determine which axioms you should hold?
What do you mean by mechanism?
Even just reason. Like, what reason do you use to determine which axioms you were to hold? Because, like Jeff said, if he said that God is his axiom, you wouldn't hold that axiom. So there's a reason why, right?
I mean, I would justify axioms at some point, not ultimately, but through, I guess, sense data and kind of repeatedly testing them throughout my life until I'm able to kind of develop the concept of an axiom. How do I get to this point here? Like, let's say, like how do you know how you can kick a soccer ball, whether it be kicking it forward or curved or like chipping it up? That sort of thing develops over time. You develop the techniques right there through sense data, and at some point you get a little bit better at it when you practice it and you apply it in other situations. Going back
Where
to
would the axiom be in that analogy?
the axiom would be, and it would be I guess the foundation for like choosing where the ball kind of goes. It would be in how you position your foot in this case. There are certain ways where you'd position your foot to achieve like that result in this case.
And so my question, the reason I asked that is because my question is, what's the reason for where you want the ball to go? Right? That's the axiom. The axiom is I want the ball to go here, X. I want the ball to go in direction X. And you're saying direction X is the axiom. I'm saying, why do you want the ball to go in direction X? What's the reason for that? And not direction Y?
Maybe because it achieves some sort of like ultimate purpose. In this case, it could be to push the ball forward and or to pass it to a teammate or to do otherwise. Like that ball moving sets up other people to move a ball. And
so
to
then
score a goal.
Wouldn't that then become your axiom because axioms are the bottom foundation?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Right. So then when you say that the laws of logic are your axiom and they're justified by sense data, what you're actually saying is sense data is your axiom.
I mean, to some degree, the reliability of sense data or the relative reliability of sense data could be the axiom, or really, I guess the claim could be I take sense data generally to be reliable.
Right. And so do you see the problem there where now I can just push you on the sense data axiom? You're going to give me another reason or mechanism to tell you why that should be your axiom. And now you have a new axiom, and we just keep on going and going until really you can just have any
yeah,
axiom.
we could do that to anybody. We could do it to an atheist, we could do it to a theist, we could do it to us, and you have been showing it works, you know. But I think that can apply to you guys at one point or another, especially when you do end up going to when we were talking about the divine knowledge thing, God's foundation for knowledge comes from God, and then we just kind of go in the same path in the other direction. That's kind of the sorry.
No, go ahead. I don't want to cut you off.
That's just kind of the issue with like these kinds of debates. Both sides, it really kind of depends on who's able to assert and ask more questions, and then the other side just looks weaker because at a certain point, you can ask somebody so many questions before they just get to it's self-evident or I don't know how to justify that. That's kind of like the issue with these kinds of debates. And I've watched enough to be able to just come to the conclusion that I don't think it's knowable. And I think both me and Bones here can acknowledge that at a certain point, our axioms and our foundation is either just self-evident, like through sensatory data, or we just can't really know after a certain point. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, and tell me if
Oh,
I'm wrong, but it seems like
it
you're
is what it
saying
is.
it is what it is.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're saying the existence of God isn't knowable because nothing is knowable.
Well, it depends on how
Things-
far you're going with knowable. Are you talking absolute knowledge? Because as I said in my opening statement, I don't even think our sensatory data can do that because we do hallucinate. We do have various malfunctions with our five senses. So even that isn't entirely reliable. When I say something like knowable, I'm just talking like generally colloquially speaking. Can we measure and
Okay.
verify it with our current faculties and
All right.
forms of measurement?
I think this is a great way to go out because you're saying when you say, can you give me then an example that you would accept as knowable? Something.
I would say, well, again, it just really depends on how you define knowable. If we're talking
All
about
right.
the
However you
colloquial
define it.
general usage of knowable, then I would just say looking at my teleprompter here is knowable just because that's what I can verify with my current faculties. If we're talking about something that's going to be absolutely true and hold to the test of time, I'm not sure that's necessarily obtainable, at least right now.
Cool. So then in that would go back to an axiom that is either subjective or unjustifiable, right?
Yeah, at a certain point, as I
Right.
said, there's just a certain point where it's either self-evident or you can't really justify it because you kind of think it just is.
Right.
Just like with God, just like with the transcendental argument of God kind of thing. It just kind of gets to that point.
I
But what
think a
you're
good way to
saying,
talk
It's
about
the
hold on,
this.
problem in the
let me finish
criterion.
this line of
But yeah.
logic real
Okay,
quick.
go for it.
But so what you're saying is the screen in front of you, the existence of it, or you knowing that it's there, is the thing that's knowable, even though it relies on an axiom that is at the ultimate level unjustifiable or unknowable or subjective. But by your own standard, as long as I can say that God exists and I base it on an axiom that I can't justify, that is ultimately unknowable, then I have uh, completed the prompt that just like the screen in front of you, his existence is knowable, God's existence is knowable by your own standard.
I'm sorry, can you I kind of like lost
I
a
can
little
repeat
bit
it.
in the
Yeah,
midway. It's a little bit late where I'm at.
I
same,
I
same.
I
um
would disagree because I even think that my own like axioms aren't like ultimately like satisfactory either, and I don't think that the claim that
Okay.
God can be justified by axioms is satisfactory.
yeah, we
That's
are
where
always
it's
learning
getting
after all.
because since you and I both we all agree that Munchausen's trilemma is true. Like at that point, you would also have to say that it is not a satisfying conclusion.
But then you would also have to say, at least according to Paul's example, that the existence of the screen in front of you is not knowable. It's not
Yeah,
satisfactory.
it's
Well, yeah,
ultimately
it just
yeah,
depends on how far you
but
go with
Okay.
knowable. I would say
but
with
I
general
can
certainty, not absolute, because I could be hallucinating right now. I could be in the middle of a room in like North Korea or something like that, right? I don't know that for like absolutely certain, but based on my current what I have available to me, my five senses and stuff, being able to touch it like that, I believe it to be generally believable that there's one right in front of me.
I can
And I'm
say
I'm
that
using these words a lot more specific, like specifically because since we're talking in the realm of philosophy, something that I probably messed up a little bit with earlier on my part is trying to use these words more colloquially.
I understand. And I'm just trying to go based off your own definitions. And
Mhm.
if I could, Bones, if you would like to do this as well, could you give
sure.
me something that is knowable?
Something that I would say is like knowable to the degree to where like we can operate normally and not have to kind of be ultimately skeptical. Let's say that like a tree in a park exists.
Okay.
I experience that tree through sense data, through tactile, like feeling it. I could even like smell maybe the pine cones that come off of it. Other people are also going by it. They also smell it. And over time, enough people are able to kind of, what's the word I'm looking for, experience it. And at some point, we can kind of accept that that is a tree, and that, let's say, it's a pine tree too, since I'm mentioning pine cones, and that, let's say, after like 1,000 people pass by that park and they pass by that pine tree, one person passed by the pine tree and they're like, I smell pecans. That doesn't make it a pecan tree at that point.
Right.
um, they could just be mistaken necessarily. And of course, like, at some point, all of our sense data kind of breaks down and it can't be ultimately reliable, but
But it
for
is
the sake of
knowable.
operate, it's practically reliable, I'd say.
But that
In order,
tree, the existence of the tree in the park is knowable.
yes.
Okay.
They
And
exist, yeah.
the underlying axioms, maybe there are multiple, but one of them is that sense data is generally reliable.
Yeah, it's generally reliable, I'd
Right.
agree.
So then so if you're saying the tree in the park is knowable, even though the underlying axioms are, would you say subjective? Would you use that term? How would you say unjustified? What would you say?
I would say that ultimately, at the end of the day, the axioms that we base our like knowledge on would be subjective.
Okay. So now I have an axiom. My subjective axiom is that God is the necessary precondition for knowledge. This isn't my position. I'm just using it as an internal critique
Sure.
by your own standard. God is the necessary precondition for intelligence, for knowledge. That's my axiom. I have knowledge out in the world. Therefore, and based on my axiom, I can know that God exists based on that knowledge. Even though my axiom is ultimately subjective, you would still have to concede that God's existence is knowable in the same way that the tree in the park's existence is knowable based on your own standard.
And then what do you base that axiom on? Or
It's just subjective.
it's subjective at that point, but what is it subjective to? I think is the
Well,
question.
just the same thing that your axioms are yourself.
You're saying that by using your sense data, you're able to prove,
Because
no.
your axiom is sense data. So
So
you
how
out in the world.
how do you go backwards from knowledge to your axiom, God, in this case?
Right. So my axiom is that God is the necessary precondition for knowledge.
But how do you get from your knowledge to God as the axiom?
Well, I go out in the world and I know things, right? Other people tell me that I know things. We all know things. And then based on that, I go back to my axiom that's subjective. And if we know things, then the necessary precondition for that is God. So therefore, God exists.
Um,
In the same way that sense data being generally reliable, as your axiom is, you go out, you say, okay, well, this person says there's a tree, that person says there's a tree in the park. We all agree that there's a tree in the park. Therefore, my senses can give me knowledge. I
how
would
I
say,
would,
go ahead.
it, again, how I would say that is, it could be the best rebuttal I could give to this at the moment is that when I say that, like, not the knowledge that I have is practical right here, how is it practical that God is the necessary precondition for knowledge in this case?
Well, you're moving the
Bring
goalpost
it
because
together.
if axioms are subjective, they don't need to be practical.
How so? Well,
Cool.
I'm saying that the axiom right there, it can be used as it can be used practically to kind of help me navigate through life.
Right. So
That's what I'm saying.
yeah, because it can give you knowledge ultimately. Saying your sense data is generally reliable grants you knowledge. Saying God is a necessary precondition for knowledge grants me knowledge. It's practical in the same way
How so?
because we need to use knowledge to operate in the world. If we don't know things, we would never be able to actually do anything because we would be unsure. We wouldn't know things.
And God being the necessary precondition does what in this case? It just provides that foundation, is what you're saying.
Right. And frankly, it doesn't need to have practicality if it's subjective. I could subjectively believe that I could have an axiom that says unicorns make my sense data reliable. It doesn't have to be practical.
But how does that become like an ultimate source of of knowledge in this case, or an objective knowledge claim, since you
It
claim that.
wouldn't, because that's not my argument. I'm trying to do the internal critique, right? If you're just rejecting this objective knowledge, if you're rejecting that, if you're saying axioms are self-evident, unjustifiable, or subjective, then this is the problem we have. Which, look, it's fair because I think epistemic nihilism is the only way to defeat tag, but we all know that epistemic nihilism is not the way to go.
And,
I mean,
but I guess in that case, like, I would just have to say that it would just be recursive at that point.
in yours wouldn't.
Yeah, mine is recursive.
Right. Right. So it still answers the prompt that God's existence is knowable, unless you're saying it's all recursive and nothing is knowable.
The problem is you claim that he is absolutely knowable in this case, no?
In
But
your by your Rome standard, it wouldn't have to be.
Well, I'm trying to appeal to your standard now. In this case,
okay, so this is different then.
Yeah,
We've exited the internal critique, and this is now an internal critique of my worldview.
Yes.
Okay, so let's start then. Start from the beginning then.
So then, do you believe then that God being noble is an absolute truth claim?
Yes.
And so, how so?
Because he is the necessary precondition for knowledge, which goes back to the tag argument, right? And if it was not the case that God is the necessary precondition for knowledge, we wouldn't be able to justify our epistemology. We wouldn't have knowledge at the second order.
So you're saying that there can't be other like secular frameworks for this to be the case?
Exactly.
I haven't heard a secular argument that gets around Hume's challenge. Now you could probably do.
I mean, I could posit like other frameworks.
Do like
that would be able to challenge this. And in that case, I think that would make your premise false in this case. That he is the only that God or theism in this case the only necessary condition, because that's what it's really about it for Wi-Fi gospel here. Like
you're rapid fire.
You could grant like transcendent. I forget what it's called philosophically. There's like a transcendental absolutism that kind of tries to get around this problem, but it would still fall to the induction issue.
Yeah.
It's still assuming that you have reason, and like when we're asking this through tag, we're just asking where you get the vehicle to use logic, and unfortunately, I've just always heard here it is, and that doesn't ask where it came from.
Well, that's why I ask, isn't it okay to just say, I don't know, and show some intellectual humility on these kinds of things? Because really, we can't measure or verify any of this stuff past a certain point, right? We can at least agree on that. We cannot use tools. We cannot use our five senses to measure anything past a certain point, especially a deity that is not even on our plane of existence.
Well, if God exists, we would be able to, right?
If God exists, we would be able to detect it?
Well, no, I'm saying if God exists, we would be able to trust our senses. That would make sense. I'm not saying that it's true. I'm just saying it would make sense.
Well, yeah. Well, we're talking about what is true because we're talking about what is knowable, right?
Yeah, and that's what we've been talking about. But I'm saying, like, you haven't provided a scenario in which it makes sense. You're just saying it is.
In which what makes sense?
That our senses are generally reliable.
Well, I would say our senses are just generally reliable because after a certain point, it just kind of becomes self-evident. This is how we function in our day-to-day life. If they weren't reliable, we'd all probably be dead, you know? When it comes to God, though, I'm telling you already, like I did in my opening statement, that I base most of my knowledge and most of my views on empirical data, ways to verify and measure stuff, and material reality. When it comes to certain things like a cosmic designer or whatever you want to call it, like God in this instance, but some people call it differently, I just haven't seen conclusive proof from an empirical standpoint for or against this deity that could exist or might not exist. It's like a thing where we can't really find out the answers for sure. We cannot verify it until we die, kind of thing. It's kind of what I'm trying to argue with this prompt. Would you generally agree that's agreeable, or?
I would say that if you force empiricism, there may not be a way. I'm sure there are other people who could argue an empirical evidence for God. But you yourself don't believe that everything must be proved empirically.
Well, I'm not. I'm when you say must, do you mean like there's a moral imperative, or like it has to be answered? Like, what do you
No,
mean
like
by must?
is there anything that you believe that isn't empirically proven?
Anything that I personally believe?
Hmm.
Hmm.
Santa
Well, I
Claus.
would.
No,
I'm
that's
trying to think
empirically
here because
proven.
that is a good question. Hmm. I would say
He ate the cookies.
I actually can't think of anything off the top of my head, at least, honestly. I don't say that as like some sort of
Mm.
what do you call it? Like
But so would
tooting
that
my
mean
own
you're
horn
like
kind of
a
thing or
hard
whatever.
materialist? Because
What was that?
there's you don't come off to me as a hard materialist. But if you
Mhm.
don't believe in anything that's not empirically proven, it almost seems like that makes you a hard materialist.
I'm not really. I haven't really read like Marx or anything like that. I think he's the guy who's behind materialism or Hegel or some shit like that. Don't really know off the top of my head. I would say I generally lean materialist based on my understanding of it. I'm not very idealist or anything like that for the most part. Maybe a little bit idealist in the sense of what I kind of want for the world and what is ideal, but that's a whole other discussion for a whole other day. But generally, when it comes to me formulating my views and how I argue stuff, I try my best to argue it based on what I can observe and measure in material reality.
Right.
There could be
So
exceptions. I just can't think of it off the top of my
he-
head.
here's something. Do you believe that human rights exist?
No.
Oh, hey, good. Okay. Interesting. Now, all right, do you believe the laws of logic exist?
Depends on what you mean by exist. If you mean exist as a construct in our mind to be able to explain phenomenon that we can see, such as the law of non-contradiction and stuff like that, then yes.
Would that be
But I
empirically
sort of see
proven?
the laws of logic more as kind of descriptors for how things function, rather than something that exists in the sense of like a material thing. It's just a observation statement, I would say it is.
So you
Perfect.
believe in things that are abstract.
If it doesn't exist in a material way, then that would mean you believe in something that doesn't exist in a material way.
Right.
So that would make you not a materialist.
Well, like I said, I kind of lean materialism. I haven't really read up entirely on it to be able to take a super hard stance and defend it in a case like this. So,
Gotcha. And my whole point with this, and then Jeff, you had something to say. My whole point was that you believe in things that are not empirically proven, so it would be wrong to force that standard on something like God.
well, I'm not trying to necessarily force it. I'm just trying to ask questions to be able to get to the root of your foundation and either see if you can provide some sort of material justification or if you can just say, I don't know, or at least, at the very least, you can't measure or verify God's existence with our current faculties that we have on hand. If we could get something, if I can get something like that at the very least, then I'd be more than happy. I'm not trying to force anybody to be agnostic or anything like that, to be entirely clear. I just want to ask questions and
Yeah.
be able to learn a little bit more about you guys and stuff.
Fair
I
enough.
gotcha. I have more to say to that, but Jeff did have something to say.
Oh, I was just doubling down on you because it seems like if we're going into abstract thought, those don't exist empirically. So you're not taking a hard stance on naturalism if you're granting abstract conceptual thought. Those aren't things that we can really demonstrate. I mean, we can write them out, right, and that kind of thing, but you can't like show the thoughts that are going on in your mind empirically.
Yeah, I don't really take a hard stance on most of philosophy just because it's very in our heads. It's very
Yeah.
subjective, what different philosophical frameworks and stuff like that. I'm more so influenced by Max Stirner's egoism, who's known as like the anti-philosopher guy, right? So I generally do try to push all of like the big verbal jargon aside and try to speak more in layman's terms, not only for myself, but for the audience to understand it,
Yeah,
which is
fair
kind of why I wanted to set the frame a little bit on how we define knowledge, whether if it's like general colloquially, something that we know based on our faculties and stuff like that, or if we're talking a very philosophical version that might end up putting us on two different pages, because I generally try to come at philosophical topics from a more colloquial standpoint.
Understandable. That's fair.
Would we want to move into closing statements and then open the panel and see what else we get?
Yeah, sounds
Sure.
good.
Yeah, I think we're at the end of the discussion for the most part.
This has been a very mild mannered discussion. So thank you. And I actually had some moving parts for my my daughter's like some things that had to do in the moment, and I'm like, thank goodness I could actually walk away and feel good about it.
You know,
So thank
my
you.
my cat barged into my room at one point, so I was trying to figure out what he wanted.
We were getting
Fair
along.
enough.
Unacceptable.
We were getting along
Only
long
my
enough. That's
children.
pretty good. I'm glad that this didn't turn into like a bloodbath. Sometimes it's
I
just
mean,
Yeah.
I was prepared to go into the blood sports a little bit, but
Well,
Yeah,
also I'm glad
we
I'm
were
just
talking about it a
this
little bit, but
open
I'm glad it
panel,
happened
man.
this way
Open
we
personally.
panel.
we've been
typically
saving for the past week.
yeah, we can speak now, and then the panel can also change that up if they so choose. So you
Sure.
never
Oh
know
boy.
what you're going to get. So let's go ahead with our closing statements, gentlemen, and then we'll move into open panel dumpster fire after we read some of these super chats. Jeff, to you.
Yeah. So when a skeptic argues that Tagg's claim God is the precondition for induction and abstract thought assumes a criterion human reasoning's reliability to argue for God, which is circular or ungrounded, especially because of Hume's problem of induction, which undermines induction's justification. Tag does not start by assuming the reliability of human reasoning or induction in a vacuum. Rather, it argues that the intelligibility of reasoning, induction, and abstract thought presupposes a metaphysical function, a rational, sovereign God. This transcendental method sidesteps the problem of the criterion by identifying the necessary conditions for knowledge itself rather than relying on ungrounded criterion. And with that, I'll just give it over to my partner.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Alex, to you.
I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. Thank you, Bones and Paul, for doing this, and thanks for Jeff for getting this started. Of course, thank you, Sarah.
I'm always
Congrats on
stirring the pot
10K.
over here.
You are. Uh, Congrats on 10K. I think when I met you like 3-4 months ago, you were at less than half that.
Mhm.
Sarah is. There's a reason for that. It's because Sarah works hard. I mean, she answers DMs like instantly. Generally, she doesn't care like if you're super popular or like she's just willing to put in the work, network, and make stuff happen. I appreciate that a lot. As far as the debate goes, I do think that I provided a solid argument for the existence of God. For the prompt, is the existence of God knowable? I do think that I provided a solid answer for that. I think the argument against it was basically epistemic nihilism, although they don't seem to hold to epistemic nihilism. So while I think that that may be a defeater, it's really hard for anyone to actually hold to that, and if they do, it's even harder to live that out. Um, I think also though a big point for us was that I was able to prove from their standards, both Bones and Paul. I asked them to give me something that they would say is knowable by their standard, and I think that based on their standard, I was also able to give proof that God's existence is knowable. So go back, watch the debate. That was more towards the end. If you want to go back to it. Um, Other than that, I'm looking forward to getting to the open panel.
Thank you, Alex. Bones, to you.
So to conclude this debate and to continue the host glazing here, the only absolute truth that we have here is that Sarah's a great moderator. So I think that's the only truth claim that we can really ground things. But but yeah, outside of that, I'm gonna disagree with Alex here and say that his answer to whether God is knowable is ultimately like unsatisfactory. Whether it is like complete and total epistemic nihilism, I would also disagree because I don't believe in epistemic nihilism, and I do believe that at some point there's something that I would accept to be true as a foundation that doesn't necessarily rely on a God. And at this point, I still remain pretty agnostic on the existence of a God, whether it be the Christian God, whether it be Brahmin, whether it be the flying spaghetti monster, and whether it be this screwdriver as well. But either way, thank you very much for having this discussion. I hope to have more productive ones in the future.
Absolutely. And Paul,
And
final
for
words
me,
to you.
I guess I don't really have not much else to say for a very first debate panel that I've ever been on. I think it went pretty well. I'm really glad I got to talk to you guys. Thanks, Sarah, for hosting us. Ask some pretty good questions about my own views personally that I can probably look back on a little bit. But other than that, I just don't really have much else to say. I really appreciate it, guys, taking the time out to talk to me and Bones here.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Wonderful.
Really appreciate it.
Same here.
Perfect. Well, thank you to all of you. And I already knew this was going to be a well-mannered debate because all four of you were able to be in a group message together to figure out dates and times, and nobody was mad, and we were all laughing and able to, get along that way. And usually I don't operate that way, but in this instance, I think it just kind of worked out. So shout out to all of you for being agreeable people and able to get along and move forward for purposes of the conversation. I have dropped the link for open panel dumpster fire if anybody wants to go ahead and start jumping backstage.